All right, we are back with this big Portulacaria Afra, aka dwarf jade, spec boom, elephant's food, elephant's foot. If you remember, last time we looked at this tree, I cut the back branch off of this and set the design as an informal upright, and I left it to grow really, I think, all winter. You can check the previous video if you want to know the timeline. But now that it is early spring, so it's March 9th, I think, I'm gonna come in and take the tree back to the first leaf set on probably most of these branches. So I'm gonna start with anything that's growing straight up. I'm just gonna cut back. Well, you notice this one I did not cut yet because I think I might want the extension on that branch. We'll see. But cutting back to the first leaf set creates more density on each of these shoots. Actually, I'll keep it oriented toward you so you can kind of see. And every time I cut one of these, I'll have 2 new shoots grow out of each of those cut points. So if you continue to repeat this process, the tree will get really thick. I like to do this as opposed to letting like a branch grow out really far and then cutting it back, to develop. I like to develop the pads before I develop the long branching sometimes, because what happens often is if you let one of these branches grow a little bit too long, it'll start to drop the leaves that are closest to the beginning of that shoot, and what happens is you don't have anything to cut back to. So I like to cut back sooner than later, maybe 4 to 6, 8 leaf sets, kind of just depends. Some of these, well, let's look at this one. This was 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 leaf sets. So that's about a good length to cut back to the first 2. But I don't really want to go too much more than that, again, because sometimes it will drop the leaves that are toward the interior of that little shoot. So if you catch it just before it does that, then you can get more of that tight ramification. But again, some of them I do like to let grow out if I want that to be a longer branch, because I need this to thicken and develop and create a little bit of structure over here. So once we get toward the end, then I'll make that decision. But I do often prioritize getting a really tight, just ramified top, that's kind of cloudy and billowy, and letting it grow out and removing branches as I go, as opposed to growing out long branches. Some people do that a little bit different with their jades, but this is how I've always done it. But if I have a developed tree and I need a branch in a certain place, then I will let that branch grow really long, like the one way in the back over there in the center. I had a shoot pop out of the bottom, and I just let that grow, like for a couple months until I did anything. I just wired it and let it get thicker, so that way it could be in proportion to the rest of the tree. I hope that makes sense. If not, you can ask a question and I'll answer. So I'm gonna make quick work out of this tree because there's not tons of dense ramification on it yet. It's just, kind of a couple shoots here and there. I might miss a couple shoots. Like I may not be cutting back to the first 2 on every single one, and that's okay because I'll get them next round. Go ahead and see. Sorry. We're working with here. Look at that. Now, this feels a little too long for me. While initially I liked the idea of having this branch right here, I think it's about time for this to bifurcate right here. So, if you notice, I have a leaf here and a leaf here. So, if I cut right there, my branching is going to go that way and that way. So had I cut on the next leaf set, because these alternate, imagine this were the shoot, and had I cut like here, and had the branch go up and down, the new shoots are going to follow the same direction of those leaves. So that means that I would have had a branch go up and a branch go down. I like to prioritize having branches go, like the little shoots going that way and that way, so they're more lateral. If I'm just trying to create like distance straight out. Sometimes I will have one go down, you know, I'll cut that intentionally. And then sometimes if I'm cutting back to the first two leaf sets, also I'm just cutting back to the first two regardless of the direction, but sometimes I will use that directional pruning to get the result that I want. And this is a great example of where I want that to go. I also cut off that little leaf on the bottom because I don't need that anymore. But if you're unsure if you need your tree to bud back a little further, then leave those little older leaves because you may actually end up cutting back to those, or if you need your design to be a little tighter. So I don't typically remove those until the tree, you know, kind of has maybe a little bit more refined design, like I know what I'm doing on it. But if I'm just kind of trying to figure it out, then I'm going to leave as much of those little last year leaves on as possible. So another thing I might consider is, because I cut this back and let it to start to ramify, I'm trying to be a little bit more aggressive on some of those branches that are really long and don't have any additional branching on there. So right here, this is just way too long of a piece. I need branching back here. So I'm going to keep cutting back a little bit more aggressively on these, so that way it pushes the energy back down here. But I do want to leave enough on the branch so that way it's still sending resources up to that tip. Let me see how we're doing here. This tree is going to be the long game. You know, it's not going to be a final design right away, but if I continue this process, then I'm going to get the result that I eventually want. So I know I had this sticking out a little bit here. I'm probably going to take this back to the first leaf set, consistent with everything else, so then that way it'll split that way and that way, and I will have basically just like two branches going that direction now instead of one, so it'll be even more dense once this starts to grow back. Let's see. Now some of these I may get rid of as time goes on. Let me actually look at it from where you're looking. Like for example, these are kind of sticking way forward. So I might like remove some of these, or I could wire them, but I'm not gonna make that decision yet. I'm just really trying to manage growth and push the energy back down into the tree so I get as much branching as possible. This is a slower, that's not that slow. This actually, in a year, this will look like a different tree. It'll be really nicely filled in because they start to grow pretty vigorously during the summer. But it's starting to perk up a little bit because it's been warm, so that's why I'm coming in to pull the structure back a little bit, so that way when I get that spring push of growth, it is going to not grow out on those extended ends, but I'm getting it tight so that way it can kind of explode within the tighter silhouette that I want. But I think for now, that's all I'm going to do. I want to keep a lot of these branches on here so I have options in the future. I'm going to go ahead and put this back in a sunny spot. Well, it's actually not that sunny because I don't have a lot of space back here, but the spot I'm going to put it in is going to be the best spot for it to get as much sun as possible given the space limitations. But if you really wanted this to grow, I would keep it in full sun, and I would just make sure that you are letting it dry out before you water, and then regularly pruning over the growing season. But actually, before I sign off, if you remember last time I was doing the video and not paying attention to what I was doing, and I accidentally made a slight cut right there. So that cut is still visible right there, but that will fill in over time because these trees, they grow thick from the inside and then they shed off the bark on the outside. So this will eventually kind of slough off, but And then if you see the callus on this little piece has formed. So probably when it gets a little warmer, I'm gonna come in and chop that back a little bit more too, but I'll see if this dries off anymore. And then up there as well, that will also heal over. They heal really nicely. So anyway, in the meantime, this is gonna go back on the ground over there, but don't forget to water.